Okay, I want to close our eyes. We want to breathe deeply, concentrate, thank the good spirits of the house and of the universe that work with us and through us. We want to thank the good spirits and the good energy in the world. I'm going to ask for permission to start our good work for tonight. Pray for the people who are listening and the people who are not listening, that everybody could be touched, somehow learn through our knowledge and through the knowledge of the books and the different people that work in this great charity, humble environment. With that, again, we ask respectfully permission to begin our work. So be it.
Tonight we're here with Beyond the Veil, and I'm Steve, and I'm here with my friends
Manny
and Scott,
Juan,
Raphael.
And tonight we're going to talk about Chico Xavier. And Scott, you want to kick it off for us?
Okay, so young man born in the early 1900s. Large family. I think there was 9 children altogether, 9 siblings. In his early age, was not an easy life for him. Let's talk about that. So his mother passed, and his father couldn't handle raising the kids, so he split them up. Chico ended up at his godmother's, and she was not a nice person. But one of the key things, she was mean to him, literally. One of the key things to him that helped him keep his balance is he was communicating with his past mother, his mother's spirit that had passed, and that's, probably the catalyst for him to not, having to deal with some of the hard life that he dealt with his grandmother as his guardian. Later on, his father remarried, but the stipulation of his new wife was that he bring all the children back together again. So that was kind of interesting. So again, you don't have to have this dramatic or this fluffy or this beautiful, life to, find your way through, spirituality or spiritism beliefs. I mean, it could be just a regular person. It could be, the same trials and expiations that a lot of us go through. Again, but this is someone that rose above, made a connection, and that connection happened for him at age 21. At age 21, he began to read Kardec's work. And within 4 years, he started his first psychography, and he started to write. Right? So I'll kind of stop there and see if anyone want to continue to talk about how he touched the lives of others, through his writing. I'll start with, we know a little bit later on, he began, his mediumship faculties, where his mentor, Emmanuel, I'm sure that'll come up during the talks today, and one of the Emmanuel had charged him with a mission, to discuss the mission with him, and he started out with saying, you're going to write 30 books. That's 30, that's where it started. And maybe I'll go a little bit further because it's kind of a neat story. So you're going to write 30 books, and it's like, okay, let's do this. So beautiful books about enlightenment, how to conduct your life, anywhere from, the love, charity, you name it. Most of you may have already read it. If you haven't, find the works of Chico Xavier. That's written by Emmanuel and other spirits. Chico Xavier, for those in English, clearly is the medium, conducting the physical writing. But so the 30 books, when the 30 books are done, it's like, all right, we did that. And they said, wow. So Emmanuel charged him again and go, why don't we double that? Let's go for 60. So there we go. So now we're into the 60 books. And then, of course, after that was done, the 60 went, let's do 100. Got to 100 books. That was about age 60, 40 years later, I think it was. And she goes like, okay, I'm done. I want to retire now. It's a lot of work. I did my thing. And so it was a joke. I don't know if you remember this, but part of it was a joke that was talked about. The Emmanuel was going, well, are you sure? And Emmanuel was going, no, I'm going to retire. I'm kind of done. It's like, well, Jesus, has some ideas, that maybe you want to, And he said, yeah, no, I don't want to. And he said, well, Jesus has, now that you say that Jesus has some other ideas, that maybe today's your last day on earth. No, that's okay, I'll write some more books. So it was kind of a joke that I had found that they were joking around that, you know, hey, look, the more you do good work, the more we need your good work. So
That's not funny at all,
so,
actually.
so it was intended to be. But so what progressed was the work never ended, and he produced 469 books through his early 90s.
But along those lines, I think one of the main reasons why we are talking about Chico Xavier today, it's because he's one of those people, he's one of those persons that set an amazing example with his life. His life, all of his life, is an incredible example of devotion to service to others, selflessness. It's just, I think the word would be impeccable. He is one of the few, very few people that we can really say he was absolutely impeccable throughout his life.
Totally dedicated.
Absolutely. That's just an example. The fact that he wrote, I think by now, because he left many things that haven't been published, so by now I think it's 502 or 3 books, something like that. It's an incredible amount.
Many books were published posthumously, you know, after he died. Like they picked up like the napkins that he had written messages on and stuff, and started compiling books out of them extra.
And that's just a fraction of what he did, of the work that he did for others. So many things. So, you know, there's a few people historically that we can say, wow, those are, you know, examples. They set the bar very high, and I think Chico Xavier was one of those very few people that we can say, wow, impeccable life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chico Xavier, you know, we all know who Chico Xavier is. Very famous medium, probably the most famous medium in Brazil. Like Juan said, by now he's written over 500 books, and just a very charitable person, gifted with a very strong faculty for mediumship. And like Scott said, he hit the first spirit that he saw was his mother, who had passed away when he was very young, and he had trouble realizing that she had actually passed away, because he saw her so clearly in his life that he didn't know that she was a spirit. And he would have conversations with her, and she would, you know, give him motivation, because he would, like Scott said, he was in a bad situation with his godmother. But just constantly working, being motivated also by his mentors, especially Emmanuel. And Emmanuel, one of the first things that he told Chico was to you know, you have a lot of work to do, and you're gonna need 3 things. And he said discipline, discipline, and discipline. And he wasn't kidding. It was at first 30 books, then, you know, 60, and basically devoted his whole life to this work, and enlightened a lot of people through the work that he did.
I had heard a story that, like, the mentors actually had a plan for another author to come and help, like both Chico and another author, I'm not sure who it was, were going to be writing this, like, all these, you know, communications. But the other author, either he passed away or something happened, like he wasn't disciplined, he didn't dedicate to the work. and so that's why they told, like, Chico, like, okay, like, now it's on you, like, you have to fill in the gap that this other guy left behind. So that's why, like, that's why he had so much work to. He was only supposed to write a certain amount of books, but then, you know, when the other guy left the job, basically, it was like, okay, now it's you have to pick up the slack, basically.
Yeah, and he would also bring consolation to thousands of people through channeled letters. So in the public meetings, every day he would, after the meeting, he would stay there until very late at night, just channeling letters that were addressed to some of the people that were in the audience, let's say. So he would channel for hours and then distribute those letters, and those letters brought a huge consolation to many people that receive those messages from loved ones.
They talked about how he would do that several days a week, not just like once a month or what have you. And it would start in the evening, right? You think about the evening, like you already did your day of work. So it started in the evening, and they wouldn't finish. They talked about even to 4 and 5 in the morning. They'd still be there finishing up.
Yeah, he didn't sleep much from what I hear. You know, to piggyback what you said, the ultimate example, I don't know if the word ultimate is, but an exceptional person when it comes to discipline. Emmanuel is a spirit that was very firm. He asked for a lot. He asked for 60. He asked for 30 to 60. He always asked for more. And Chico was a very humble person. He only had 2 pairs of shoes. Where he lived was a very simple place. People would line up outside of the door to get a psychographic message from a loved one, or from somebody that passed on to the next life. And with his extreme talent, he would communicate with spirits, and through his mediumship, strong mediumship, he would help. I don't know if it has to be in the millions at that point, throughout his whole life. He asked for 0 money, and I think that's something that sticks out to me. He never asked for anything. People would offer to give him money, and he would say absolutely not. He would edify, and edify means give credit to others. He would never give credit to himself that he was the person that was giving these messages. He always gave credit to the different spirits that worked through him and with him. And I think that's an extraordinary thing in a world where people ask for money through, tarot cards or whatnot. And I'm not saying that's a wrong thing to do. I just think that somebody who was so gifted as he was, and people would offer to give something, and he would absolutely deny it and said that, it's absolutely free. That's not his work, it's somebody else's work. And I think that's something to speak for.
He also helped bring the idea of spiritism and spirituality into sort of a mainstream secular society. And Brazil is a little different than the United States, but they had certain cases where he would write a letter from somebody, and I heard that because the handwriting matched, the signature matched, it was just uncanny, and he had never met the people before. It was just too close, that they actually used a letter in court of law, because it was somebody that had died sent a message, and somebody was accused of killing the person, and the person said no, it wasn't his fault, and wrote this letter, signed it, and they actually used that letter in court, and the person was judged not guilty because of it. So it's I wonder sometimes if that would have ever happened in the United States, but I mean, who knows?
Well, we have these stories about mediums being used by FBI and
Right.
yeah, and I guess at the end of the day that builds on the for the trial. So in a way,
Yeah.
that's happened.
Because I mean, it's not mysticism really. It's a spiritism being a science that we can explain it, and it's we're not really here to impress people or to show people phenomena. We're not here to manifest spirits and do all these kind of things for people, just to impress people or impress their curiosity. But on a certain level, we still sort of have people that need proof, and we not that we really need to prove it to science, but it's for the science's benefit to understand that there's a whole other spiritual world working alongside of our world would really help all of mankind, really. And
for those who may be skeptical, using the example of Chico, he, as we said, he wrote more than 500 books altogether, and he studied, I think, up to 5th grade or something like that. So he didn't really even make it to high school or anything similar. And if you read any of the books, the quality, the language, the content, how deep they are, how elevated, it's just, in that sense, it'd be impossible that someone who does not have a basic instruction could, write that. It probably be possible that someone with a very extensive and high instruction could write so many books on so many different topics with that depth, really.
I first noticed it like reading Andre Louise, and the spirit of Andre Louise when he was alive on Earth was a medical doctor. And in some of the books, like some of the later books in the series, he gets very in depth about like medical terminology, talking about the human anatomy and things. And like I was reading it and I was like, I have no idea what he's talking about, you know. And I mean, and these are books from, they were published in the 1940s, 1950s, like around that time, and it has like medical terminology, you know. And it's like, I'm like, okay, so this guy with like a 4th or 5th grade education, like there's no way he would be able to talk about these things. Like they didn't have Google and Wikipedia back then.
No copy paste.
Yeah, you can't do it, you know.
And again, he never took credit for this.
Yeah.
He edified people and said, you know, it was Andre Louise, it was Emmanuel, it was all the different spirits. Sometimes it was his mother that talked through him and with him. And I think that's amazing. He also worked for the government in Brazil. So he had a full-time job working for the government that was very, very, they would ask a lot from him for his job. It was very demanding. And he would support his family, you know, and then on top of it, he had the ability to write 500 books. That's amazing. That doesn't happen. And he's a once-in-a-lifetime medium that I don't know if we'll ever see somebody like him again. Maybe we will, you know, through somebody else. There's rumors that there's, you know, certain children that are talented at a young age, that are developing. But to have another Chico Xavier in the world, I don't know if we'll ever see something like that again.
I remember a quote from Chico though, saying something like, when they asked him like about his work, about his life, and he just said like, well, I'm just trying to work through my imperfections. You know, I'm just trying to work on myself here. You know, it's like this is the guy, like the way people treated him was almost like comparable to the way people would treat Jesus. If Jesus like walked in here, they would treat him the same kind of way, like really like, because people would put him on a pedestal, but he would always deny, like, you know, deny being perfect. You know, if people try to like worship him or anything like that, or like anything to make him seem like he was more than anybody else in the room. Like he was always just like so humble, you know, to say like, oh, I'm just here to become a better person, you know. It's like,
think about the other impacts though. You talked about the monetary value. So over 50 million copies. 100% of the proceeds, you know, they're sold, right? You know, the ones that weren't given were sold, but the 100% of the proceeds were given through charitable organizations, through his own charity works, and so on and so forth. Incredible in itself. I think there was some studies or some words about when he did work for the government. I think he helped identify where there was oil, right? And the Brazilians look forever, whatever, there's no oil. But again, you know, this intuition, this communication was not his. He didn't find the oil, right? So again, where does this information come from? Again, there's communication from another world to our world, so that's interesting in itself. You know, I think the impact of this additionally is then on the people. Over 5,000 followers, so they kind of tried to quantify some of this impact that he had, you know, on the people. And they had 5 million, you know, people. They had this like huge number. But again, imagine how that would propagate, right? And how that can go into the children and the cousins and the nephews and the uncles and the aunts. Imagine this momentum of that work, the work of love, right? The work of charity, the work of humility, you know, giving. So again, this is the beginning, right? So the first 100 years, okay, we went through the first 100 years of Chico Xavier, and ultimately the last 80 years or 70 years of himself. Okay, but imagine the next 100 or 500. Okay, so that's where the power is, and the work we're doing here is the power, right? So momentum, right? Think about that and what it's going to be doing, not what it has done, but I want everyone to think about what it is doing and what it will do, and that momentum carries through each one of us, everyone listening. It's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely has a resonating effect. And speaking of Chico Javier, we haven't even mentioned No Solar. He wrote the book No Solar, which is probably one of the most important books and enlightening books that he wrote. One of the first books that I wrote regarding, mediumship and things of that nature. And just an incredible book about a doctor who had, Steve mentioned this, who had disincarnated into the spirit world. And then Chico Javier was able to receive his messages about life in the spiritual world and just opened a lot of eyes and enlightened a lot of people regarding just spiritual matters, earthly matters, things that we have to go through on the earth, things that we learn. And just an incredible book, and it definitely changed my life, and probably I would say the same for everyone who's read it.
Unfortunately, a lot of people treat No Solar and those books like science fiction, but like for me, when I read it, I was like, he said too many things that just resonated with me, that like things that I knew were true. Like I just remember a part, he was talking about like there was a prayer. So he's in the spirit world, somebody's praying, and as a spirit, he has other types of senses that like we don't have when we're here on earth in the material world. So he can see things that we can't really see. So he sees the prayer and he sees the blessings actually coming down like snowflakes, actually like touching people. And he describes like a flower in everybody's heart that's like blossoming. And like when I read it, I was just like, I was so like, it really like touched me on a certain level, like that. I was just like, I knew that that prayer has power, and I've felt it before, but I could never describe it like that. Like it's not like I can see the change. And when people say things like oh, prayer, it's not doing anything, it's all in your head. It's like no, it's actually like mobilizing these spiritual forces, and like it's making like actual change. And it's like, because if you really pray, it's not about like what you say, it's just about like the feelings and like being sincere and meaning it, like really like wanting, hoping for the world to be better, hoping for everybody to have peace and joy and happiness. And it's like these prayers, and we say them here at the center, like before the meetings, we say these prayers, and it's like, if you really like attune yourself and like follow the prayer and like join in the prayer, instead of just like going off thinking about, oh, what do I have to do after the meeting? What's going on? But you really like join in the prayer. And he talks about that too. He talks about like, he's in the prayer, he's watching a prayer, and he sees that somebody is like thinking about something else, like their mind is not there, and he sees about like the effects of it. And it's like, it's like amazing. So for me, when I read it, I was like, there's just too much in here. Like I'm not like skeptical about it anymore. Like I really believe it, But I had a friend from Brazil, and her father is a spiritist and a medium. And so as I was reading No Solar, I was like, oh, I'm reading, and she's like, oh, I've heard of that book, and I'm like telling her about it, and she's like, oh, honey, like, come on, like, but I'm like, no, like, it's really like, it's impacting me, it's making like a difference, it's like, I feel it, I feel like what I'm reading is true, I'm like, nobody can really take that away from me.
He's amazing that we're even speaking to him, and millions of people still speak about him through his books. He's the type of person that works so hard through his life, and his work still is being continued. There's books still being published with him after the fact, as we mentioned before. I think that's amazing. And I think another point that's valid to make in this conversation is that to hear personal stories about him, there's people who work with him. One person, for example, is on this network, and he should be contacted if anybody has any questions, or if you're just curious to see any personal stories. He's come into our into Broward Spirit Society and spoke a couple of times. It's very powerful. His name is Geraldinho. What's his last name?
Geraldinho Limos.
Limos. And he's on this network, and he's a person that worked with Chico Xavier when he was a young person. I believe he was still as a teenager working through him, and he helped, with his studies and to spread the word of Chico Xavier. He's on this network, and I think if anybody has any questions or like wants to know a personal example of a story, he's a good person to contact.
Mm-hmm. We had one time we had a gentleman come to visit our center more than a year ago, Cesar Canero de Souza, and he sat in this room here and did a podcast with Ertzen, so they had 5 or 6 people, and they were doing the podcast, and he was telling his stories about Chico, and I was actually there like recording it, like I was recording the footage, and I felt it because like some of the people in the podcast were like tearing up, like it's like the story, because it's just like so touching, like the stuff you hear. It's like, because I don't even know like most of and they were talking in Portuguese, so I don't really know what they were talking about. But I started thinking about this is a little off topic anyway, but I started thinking about like, okay, I'm here with this guy, and this guy Cesar, he was like a good friend of Chico Xavier. And then I started thinking like Chico Xavier is like a good friend of Jesus. You know, I mean,
third degree of separation.
yeah, and I'm thinking like, so I'm here like 3 guys away from Jesus, and I felt really, it was like a really good feeling, like the whole room, you could feel like the atmosphere change in the room. It was really cool, you know. I don't think I ever.
Now we're all 4 degrees from Jesus because of you.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
for
don't
the
think I ever
reminder.
said that out loud, and now I know I'm
Nice.
never going to hear the end of it. But you know, it's like it was a good feeling, you know.
You're probably not far off. You know, someone who would dedicate, you know, an entire incarnation, right, to communicate from you know, this current world to our world here, to help lift us up. Clearly, there's meetings going on after he passed.
Well, we spoke previously about Kardec and his work, and in a way, Chico Xavier, what he did, he continued the work of Kardec. So Kardec brought the foundations, the basics of Spiritism, and then Chico Xavier brought an amazing amount of information and in many cases very practical information for our day-to-day lives. And he, through his work and through his example, through his life example, he contributed greatly to the spread of Spiritism, to, as you mentioned also, something that it's going to last for centuries.
We believe in reincarnation. It's kind of one of the bases of Spiritism. And we believe that even in the afterlife, you continue to work. So I could only imagine if he contributed so much to this earth and the work that he's done, what is he doing in the next step? Is he writing another 1,000 books? I mean, what is Emmanuel
I
asking
think about
him to
that all
do?
the time. I'm like, I wonder what he's up to now. You know?
Just
Work.
something to think about.
Yeah.
I'm sure work, whatever
Yeah.
the kind, because if there's something, and No Solar, Astral City, it's an example of it. If there's something that permeates many of the works of the books, it's the concept of work and service, of which he was a live example. But that is something that it's constantly mentioned, explained in different ways. We have to work, and he did it through discipline. But at the end of the day, it's only through work that we will be able to progress. I think that's an idea that permeates everything that he wrote.
It makes it really hard to like complain like about like, oh, we have to come to the center, we have to make this video, we have to,
Yeah.
you know, oh, I have to help out with like, you know, help out at the center. It's like, oh, you want to complain about like, look what Chico did, you know. It's like you just can't complain about anything. Like nobody wants to hear it around
I
here.
mean, there's stories of him, and to piggyback what you're saying, is that he had a problem with his eye, and his eye would bleed. And there was one time where he couldn't, it was hurting him, or he couldn't really see that well, and he asked Emmanuel and said, you know, can I take a day off? That my eye is really bothering me. And Emmanuel told him, oh, you got another eye, don't you? And he continued writing.
Right, yeah, he said something like having 2 eyes is a luxury. Yeah.
And he continued writing. He was a soldier, man. He did what he was told, and he did it to the full extent, and he led by example.
Well, there's something else I wanted to mention, which is interesting. Out of those more than 500 books, many of them are poetry books, and this is not very well known, this fact, but many of those books were, in fact, the first book that he channeled. It's a book of poetry. It's called Parnassus from Beyond. I think that something like that would be in English, and it's a collection of poems by well-known, renowned poets in the Portuguese language that he channeled those poems, and that book was studied by scholars, and many of those scholars were experts on some of the authors, the spiritual authors, and they said there's no way that anybody could have invented this or written this if not the author himself. So, but the important thing about writing poetry is that through that writing of poetry and through reading of poetry, the vibration elevates and rises. Poetry rises the vibration, and it kind of helps to be in the now, to be present, to be conscious, to be aware, and that's why the spirits channeled. He channeled so much poetry from the spirits.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's for somebody like me, like I have a hard time reading poetry because I'm just like, I don't get it like a lot of times because it's so like abstract a lot of times, you know. So I prefer to read things that are more rational, but the poetry can really like open your mind and expand your awareness and like work on your, you know, on your mental state in ways like you can't even perceive.
It's a kind of meditation. It's a type of meditation.
And it's a good change of pace. I mean, with 500 books, there's books like that are more complicated to understand. I mean, for the person that is not into the romances and the poetry, there's books like No Solar where there's medical terminology. And this is another, you know, fascinating point about him where he can go write a book, you know, through his mediumship like No Solar and then write a romance or write a book about poetry. That was his talent, you know, to be so diversified, and the people that worked with him, you know, he was talented enough to channel different people to have such a diverse taste. So there's really in his books, out of 500 books, there's something for everybody there. Sometimes you want to get a little bit more in depth and get into medical terminology, or sometimes you want to read a simple story. He's got that vast diversity, which is for everybody.
Well, there's several of those books here. And if you look, you know, Liberation, Life in the Spirit World, Evolution, and Two Worlds, Action and Reaction, right? I mean, you think exactly what you said. So there's so much content relative to how to live your life, you know, contrasts, right? Trials, you know, these kind of things that we're dealing with. So imagine we have help from others that have been here doing it, right, and studying it and evolve, elevate, and now they're on another side, you know, with the vast library and knowledge, you know, coming back to communicate and go, oh, by the way, you know, try this, you know, try that. It's going to help you. Trust me, it's going to help you. And then you can walk yourself through those steps and go, wow, this is really working. You know, I feel better. You know, my world changes. Things around me are changing. You know, my concept, my vision, my outlook on life is changing. Just incredible. Incredible the depth of the content. Absolutely.
You know, and I was reading No Solar for the first time. And I'm reading it, and then I realized as I'm reading it, like, this isn't just a story, like, this is a lesson. Because I realized, like Andre Luis is a spirit, and he's talking to the spirit mentors, and he's talking to other people who have lived on Earth before and are in the spirit world, and they'll tell him things like, now, Andre, you must remember this. So I would get out my highlighter, and I'd, okay, here's a message, like, you have to remember, like, certain things like
Steve,
you
must remember this.
Yeah, your thoughts are a powerful like magnetizing force that can you know, attract things into your life. Like it's like, oh wow, you know, people say it and we don't always like know for sure, but like you know, now I have like I'm hearing it again, and I'm hearing it from a mentor. So that's why, like last week I said my Spiritist books have no resale value because they're all like all marked up, and that was like one of them. I was like, okay, here we go. You know. So real quick, as we're wrapping up, favorite Chico Xavier book. I'll go first. On the Way to the Light is my favorite.
No Solar for me. I mean, No Solar is a book that was introduced to me when I first got involved with Spiritism, and my story was I was in the hospital, and Ana Lucia's, a lady from the center, introduced me to that book. It was the first Chico Xavier book, and I still go to study every Wednesday, and there's studies here on Tuesdays in English, and that's a book that you can just read over and over and over again, and I pick up something different every time I read it. So for me, it's Astro City or No Solar.
Well, I'm gonna go with Evolution into Worlds because I've always been fascinated by the origins of Earth and the origins of life and the evolution and how it all happened. And then we have this jewel, which is, I'm mentioning it, but it's difficult. I do have difficulties with the book, but nonetheless, it's super worth it.
On the Way to the Light for me.
I already took it. You can't say that.
That's okay. We second that notion. And there's plenty of others that could be, number ones. There's more than one on the top priority. Evolution into Worlds, great. I still like The Messengers. It was one of the first books I read. And, the whole idea of, the different characters coming together and now they're in another set of learning and thinking about the past of what didn't go well. Oh man, now we got to do better this time. And then as they walk through, that next wave of their life. But good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I still have a lot of reading to do, but No Solar, I'm going to have to go with No Solar. Definitely worth reading for anyone, for any reason.
That's the only one you've read, isn't it?
I've read parts of the other
You've
ones.
read part of it. So thank you so much, guys. It was actually really enlightening for me. So I hope the people watching at home online, I hope you're just as enlightened by this talk as I was. Thanks so much, Manny. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Juan. And thank you, Rafael. And check us out on YouTube at Discover Spiritism Network, where we have content coming out every day, new content each week. From different people and different spiritist centers from different parts of the globe. Very exciting project, very cool to be a part of it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.